Thank you for joining us. This is Health Your Own Way podcast, and I am your host, Mo Atkins. Welcome to another episode. Today, we're going to be talking about boosting your mental health with kindness and compassion. And my guest speaker today is Marcia, an author, a speaker, psychiatrist. She's also the founder of the Ruthless Compassion Institute, whose mandate is to help people have a better relationship, be happier, and create good habits. So, Marcia, thank you for joining us. I'm excited to have this conversation with you because a lot of people don't think kindness and compassion is needed in this world some days. But okay, sorry. Hi, how are you?
I'm great, and I'm very happy to be here.
I think for a lot of people, and I was saying, especially with the whole current situation with COVID-19, compassion and kindness, some of it has been lost and some of it is here. So for many people that are watching and listening, what is the difference between kindness and compassion, and can they actually work in tangent?
Yeah, so actually, I think that kindness and compassion are more or less the same thing. And the distinction that I like to make is between niceness and kindness, or niceness and compassion, because I think those are very different things. So to me, kindness is very similar to compassion because they're both coming from a place of caring and having an open heart, whereas niceness has a different kind of motivation behind it.
Oh, you have to enlighten me on that. So, so what motivation is on niceness? This is new to me.
Sure. Now, of course, they're just words, right? Nice versus kind. But the way I see the distinction is that kindness comes from basically a place of real self-love and self-acceptance. And then your heart is overflowing that love toward others. And with the compassion piece, we are moved to act. So kindness comes from a place of empathy, and compassion is this being compelled to do something in response to perceived suffering or injustice. Whereas niceness is coming from a different place. Niceness is really coming from a place of wanting to do something for somebody else in order to get something in return, something like approval, acceptance, love, avoid rejection, avoid criticism. So niceness is not the same to me as kindness. And in my book, Be Kind, Not Nice, it's all about the differences and how you can actually stop being a people pleaser, which is when you're being nice, and become authentically kind and compassionate.
Now I get it. When you say the people pleaser, now I get it. I think when you were saying niceness, I'm like, a lot of people are nice. But then again, when you're nice per se, sometimes you're getting something in return. It may not be materialistic. It just makes you feel good because you want to feel like you're being the good person. You know what I mean? Or you feel like, you being that nice person. That's some people's mental state is based on that feeling. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and it comes from not feeling like you're enough within yourself. And so you're looking outside yourself for your self-worth, for your self-esteem, for your self-confidence. And so in being nice to others, you're hoping to feel better about yourself. But the problem is you're not being authentic when you're being nice. It's not coming from a true desire to help. It's coming from a deeper need for approval or love or avoiding rejection or anger. So it's not authentic, it's not genuine. And the person who's being a people pleaser, who's being nice, knows deep down inside that they're not being authentic. And so if somebody likes them or approves of them, they know it's not for the real self. So they can never benefit from the approval that they're getting anyway. And the person on the other side who's watching the people pleaser can't really love them because the people pleaser is behaving kind of like an object. Let me do this thing for you and then you can love me. And so it's very hard for somebody looking in on the people pleaser to love them because they don't see them, they don't know them, they just see this person being this object trying to get gratification by pleasing. So it really prevents love. It's a kind of a transactional relationship that makes love not possible. Whereas being kind and compassionate comes from love and can foster love. So nice versus kind also really is the difference between coming from a place of love and being able to be loved versus coming from an inauthentic place of need and not being able to be seen or loved for your true self.
You've left me speechless, Marcia. I think I know. I'm listening to you talk, and like I'm looking at maybe some of the ways I behave, or I know people that behave a certain way, and like it's some people they use kindness and niceness interchangeable, and the way you explain it isn't, because if you're when you choose to be kind, that's something you're not looking to seek anything. You're doing it because of you, from deep down, you want to help. Like, it's just something nice. Is if you're being nice, like, I'm just being nice because you want some, it depends on the person. We're talking in general, like people are watching, it depends on the person. We're not saying everybody's like that, but majority of the time, most people, if they're being nice, especially people pleasers. And when you say that, you remind me of a friend of mine. I can tell that, she is nice, but she's a people pleaser. She is. And I know it hurts her. And I know that when you said when you made the comment that people don't really eventually respect or maybe love that person back because they become an object, that is very profound. I never thought about it that way.
The one thing I really want to say is that people pleasers aren't doing it deliberately, right? They're not deliberately setting out to try to get somebody to love them. It's coming from this unconscious need and this habit that they've developed. It's like a survival habit. If I'm nice, if I'm pleasing, maybe somebody will love me and approve of me. So it's not coming from a bad place at all. It just deprives them of authentic relationships and authentic intimacy, because intimacy is to see and be seen. And if you're busy being nice and a pleaser, you're not being seen and you're not being loved for who you are. So it backfires. It doesn't actually work. And this is the problem with these defense mechanisms that we learn when we're children, right? Because children are very primitive. And so we choose unconsciously as children these very primitive kinds of ways of getting our needs met, but they don't work. And when we're adults, that's when it's our responsibility to become conscious of what we're doing and to change our behaviors. And that's why I started the Ruthless Compassion Institute, because I wanted to get my message of consciousness and self-compassion out to others so that people could start seeing themselves without criticizing themselves for what they see. Because it's not about being bad or wrong. It's just about having started making these choices in childhood. The choices don't work, and we need to see what we're doing so that we can change and do better for ourselves and in our lives.
So then how do you help somebody that is a people pleaser? And I'm saying this because I want to educate myself. Like, how do you get, like, they are self-aware. Some people are self-aware that people pleaser. And, some of them are able to make small changes, but it's like, I feel like it's ingrained in them.
That's a really great question, because there's a difference between self-awareness and self-healing. Okay. So you can have insight without being able to change, because change requires both insight and healing, because it's not just being conscious of what's going on that's going to make us have really deep and lasting change. It's being able to heal those wounds that drive our behaviors, because our wounds drive behaviors. Our wounds drive our people pleasing. Our wounds drive all our dysfunctional behaviors, addictions, dysfunctional relationships. It's all driven by our early life wounds, right? Or later life wounds that compound our early life wounds. So we need to do the healing work. And when we have done the healing and we can love ourselves just as we are, the people pleasing no longer is a compulsion, because we don't need external love, because we've got our internal love. We've got our healing and our love in place. And so the drive to please, the drive to be nice just goes away.
But I guess my question is to you, because when you say this, I keep thinking of a few people I know.
Yes.
Is it even, is there a specific age where you cannot undo being a people pleaser?
No, I think that anybody can change at any time in life if they are motivated and they're willing to do the work. I've had a psychotherapy practice for over 20 years, and I have had patients who started in their late 70s, and I've had patients who started in their 20s. And the one thing that I see in terms of people being able to succeed in change is, like I said, the motivation to change and the willingness to do the work of change. And the work is, it's significant. It's not going to happen overnight. They have to face the wounds. So I have a 4-step approach to emotional healing. So the first is facing the wounds. So you have to face what happened to you that caused you wounds. That can be the hardest step for some people, because if, let's say, it's their parents who hurt them, they can have this loyalty toward their parents and not be willing to see that maybe their parents did the wrong thing. Maybe their parents convinced them that they would be bad if they saw their parents in a negative light. Maybe they were a little bit brainwashed. You can't see us in a bad light, so you're going to be a bad kid if you see us having hurt you. So that's the way that abusive parents protect themselves from consequences, right? And sometimes it's just these parents were misguided. Maybe they were wounded themselves. Maybe they had their own, traumas. And so they're not able to love and nurture their children in the way that the children need. So whatever it is, whether it's deliberate or accidental, these kids grow up with these wounds, and they have to face the wounds, and they have to face where they come from. So that's sometimes very challenging, but you got to face your wound, because if you can't see the wound, you can't heal the wound. And then the next step is you have to grieve your wounds. And the grieving can be quite an extended process where you actually do grieving work. You cry, you mourn, you face the hurts and the losses and the traumas you experienced. And of course, this can be very upsetting. And so it's best done with a therapist, a coach, somebody who is supportive and knowledgeable and skilled and can guide you through this grieving process. The next step in the process is the self-love process, is recognizing that all the bad things that happened to you were not your fault. You didn't make them happen, because a lot of times when people have bad things happen to them when they're young, they blame themselves, because children are naturally self-focused and they think that anything that happens to me must be caused by me. But that's not the case. Sometimes bad things just happen because you're in the wrong place at the wrong time. So forgiving yourself, seeing that you're not responsible for the bad things that happen to you, and building that self-love and self-acceptance just because, not because of your beauty or your accomplishments or your strength or your success, but just because you are here, right? Loving yourself unconditionally and accepting yourself with all your flaws and all your picadillos and foibles, just being okay with who you are. That's step 3. And then step 4 is pursuing meaningful relationships and activities to fill you up with things that are meaningful and substantial, as opposed to engaging in these dysfunctional compensatory mechanisms like people pleasing or addiction or whatever else we do when we've been traumatized. So those are the 4 steps: facing your wounds, grieving your wounds, loving yourself, and pursuing meaningful activities. And part of loving yourself is also, by the way, acknowledging that inner voice that comes in your head that we all know about, that inner critic who's basically mirroring all the negativity that you absorbed as a child, whether from your parents, your teachers, your clergy, your coaches, whoever. So it's hearing those voices and realizing that they're not your own voice. They're voices that have been internalized from the outside, and being able to recognize them as negative, counterproductive, not helping you do better. Constant criticism does not whip you into shape, it whips you down. So recognizing those voices as negative, rejecting them, and replacing those negative voices with positive affirmations like, I'm okay, I'm good enough, I'm perfectly imperfect, you're a liar, get thee behind me, Satan, whatever you want to do, get those voices out of your head, but really not buying into the lies, because those are lies, because those aren't, they're not true and they're not constructive. So that's part of the process of learning to self-love.
Just give me a second, Marcia. I felt like, I think a lot of people don't know that they are nice because they have some. A lot of people don't know this.
It's true.
Like I don't think they're even self-aware, because even when you're talking, I can almost name 4 or 5 people I know, and I'm just like, I know, I can tell that they're taking advantage of the people that supposedly love them. They don't respect them the way they should be. And I get very upset when someone's too nice. I'm like, you need to stop. And I get not physically, but visually upset. I'm like, I have a friend, like, stop doing that. You have to love yourself. You can't let people do that to you. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really nice to hear this from you, because it kind of makes me feel like I'm not mentally crazy. I have an idea of what's going on.
No, you totally do. And it's very painful to watch somebody we love tolerating disrespect and, not being able to help them change. But the changing process is a very deep process, and it really needs to be done in the context of some kind of personal growth work. You can't do it with a friend. You can't tell your friend, snap out of it, because it's not going to happen. You can see your friend and you can feel for your friend, but it's only when your friend realizes that they need to do their inner work. And they might not even do their inner work because they want to stop people pleasing. They might just say, I need to do my inner work because I'm not happy and things keep happening. The same patterns of dysfunction keep happening in my life. I keep picking hurtful partners, or I keep failing in my job, or I keep feeling stuck in my creativity, or my self-esteem is terrible. So whatever reason they decide, then once they're in the process of doing their therapeutic work, then they can recognize, oh, okay, this is an issue I have to deal with. and then do the, facing, grieving, self-love, pursuing meaningful relationships and activities. By the way, I wanted to say something because you were talking about how, your friends are people pleasers. This is something you might have noticed. What can happen is the people pleaser can get really resentful because they're giving and they're giving and they're giving and they're being disrespected and they're being taken advantage of, and they're being, really, taken for granted. And then they start seething, right? But because they're people pleasers, they don't want to say anything because, they don't want to get rejected. So they hold it in and they hold it in. And then what can happen is that they can have an outburst. They can leak because it can finally blow up. And then they're horrified, right? They're absolutely horrified with themselves because it's over the top, because it's all this pressure that's built up and then the volcano erupted. And so then, of course, what they do is then they shut themselves down even more because they feel so guilty and so fearful, guilty that, they were not nice, and fearful that they'll be rejected, that then they put the lid down even more. And then they're just more miserable. So it's a very unhappy cycle. Yeah. And so for everyone's sake, for the person who's in a relationship, who's not getting an authentic, intimate friend, and for the people pleaser who's not getting their needs, their real needs met, I highly recommend going and getting somebody to talk to who is skilled in this, who can help you work through the process. I also have a book called Emotional Overeating. You can get it on Amazon. You can go to my website, marciasirotamd.com. And I talk about it, these healing steps, in the context of overcoming addiction, which I believe is actually also a result of trauma and just another dysfunctional coping strategy in order to try to provide themselves with healing or nurturing or soothing. So I go through the steps in great detail in my book, Emotional Overeating. And so if anybody's interested in, learning the steps and having a real, walkthrough, they can have a look at the book as well.
Before we move forward, I want to mention something. You stated that when they blow up, it's big. Then what I also have heard is that their loved ones or somebody that they've blown up against, they seem surprised and they make them feel bad because you're like, okay, well, why are you acting like this for? Because they're so used to them being pleasing that it's now it's almost like, lack of better terms, for emotional abuse, because they're saying, well, why are you acting like this? You're being too this and this. No, I'm defending myself. You're being a but you don't get that from me a lot. So you think it's being aggressive.
Absolutely, because everyone gets used to the people pleaser being super, super nice. And so when the people pleaser behaves out of character, it's a big shock because they're not the average person who can have different kinds of temperaments. The people pleaser only has to be nice, only has to be friendly and upbeat. And so if they explode in anger or frustration, there's no tolerance for this behavior because you're supposed to be nice all the time because that's the way you presented yourself. That's the expectation you've created. You're not allowed to diverge from this norm. And so the poor people pleaser is just shoved right back into their little box of pleasing. It's a very unhappy existence. None of it is done consciously or deliberately. Like I said, they're not bad, they're not wrong, they're not dumb for doing it. They're just, reliving this pattern of dysfunctional defenses that they learned in childhood. And how wonderful it would be to be free of this pattern that's creating so much suffering for them. And freedom comes from consciousness and from healing.
So then I know that you have a podcast called Ruthless Compassion. Would you say for people watching or listening, they can actually, tune into your podcast and maybe get some of that feedback or get some idea of how to better themselves or even your books?
I would say to go to my books and my blogs, because in the podcast, I'm interviewing all different people, like you interview people, and it's people who are inspirational, who have their own journey. So we might touch on ruthless compassion and kind versus nice, but we might touch on something completely different. Whereas if you go to my blogs, if you go to my books, I also have online courses that people can sign up for. All of that, I would say, and my video series, they can sign up for my newsletter where they're getting
on your website, like your platform is your website, like everything's all on your website.
Okay. On my website, so they can go and look at all that, and they can get a lot of information on how they can start becoming conscious with the ruthless compassion. And the ruthless compassion is about seeing yourself with very clear eyes, but without beating yourself up for what you see. That's why it's called ruthless compassion. The ruthlessness is about really seeing clearly what's going on within yourself and around you, like the people around you, like your parents, your friends, your partner, whoever. But the compassion is not beating yourself up for what you see, not beating yourself up for realizing that maybe your relationships are hurtful, not beating yourself up for recognizing that maybe your parents failed you in some way, not beating yourself up for anything, but using the information as the stepping stone for personal growth and change.
I like that. And, I know you mentioned your website and blogs, and for everybody who's watching, and we are going to be mentioning that in the video. For anybody that's listening, it is on the details, because I think this is a very important conversation, because there's so many people out there, like in relationships that are toxic in any form of relationship. It could be, intimate or just any relationship. I know I'm not a people person. Sorry, I'm not people please. I'm not one of those people. And I'm okay with saying that. I really am, Marcia. I'm okay with saying that.
Good thing. That's a good thing, because people pleasing does not get you happiness and love. It gets you taken advantage of, and it gets you frustrated. So the best thing to do is to be kind. And the best way to be kind is to just love yourself and take care of yourself, because then you're going to be overflowing with your own self-love. And that's the best way, because the other person does not feel obligated to give you anything in return. If you're a people pleaser, you're unconsciously putting pressure on the other person to love you back. But if you're a kind person, the person on the receiving end doesn't feel any strings attached. They just feel like, wow, this person did something kind for me. That's nice. And maybe they want to give it back to you, and maybe they want to pay it forward to somebody else. But there's no obligation. There's no transaction involved. Whereas the people-pleasing relationship, there's always some kind of transaction implied, even though it's not conscious and deliberate. I want to keep emphasizing that the people pleaser is not doing anything wrong. They're not bad. They're not dumb. They're just enacting these unconscious patterns that deep down inside they think will help, but of course won't.
Fair enough. Before I let you go, so what's next for you, Marcia? Like, what's down the pipeline that you want to share
This is a little bit of a departure, but I've started writing fiction. So I'm working on a sci-fi feminist dystopian trilogy with a young protagonist. And so it's kind of YA, young adult. And I'm bringing a lot of my concepts of ruthless compassion, kindness, emotional trauma, all of that stuff. And I'm putting them into a fictional context in this very rollicking storyline of this sci-fi trilogy. So that's what I'm doing next. And I'm in the process of looking for representation and trying to get the books out into the world.
Congratulations. I'm really happy for you. I'm actually excited. That's something different, maybe out of your comfort zone, but it's something that you can see in your face. You're excited about it.
Oh yeah, I love doing it. I love writing. It's my new passion.
Thank you. And so I wanted to say thank you for being part of this platform. I've been extremely educated, and I think it's a different mindset. I never thought about it. So it's nice to have my eyes open. And, I hope anybody is watching or listening took a lot in. And please, if you are dealing with some of those issues that we discussed today, reach out to Marcia's platform, look at the ebooks, look at the courses, look at the books. I think this is something people need to really focus on.
Yes. And in my recent articles on mental health, I also offer Ontario-based resources for people who are struggling with mental health. So if you just go and click on some of my blogs, you'll be able to access some resources if you're struggling with your mental health right now.
Perfect. We're glad to have you join us. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, share with anyone that needs to be empowered and inspired. And don't forget to join us next week for the next episode of Health Your Own Way podcast. Have a good day, you guys.